In the chaos of war, every soldier is a pawn. But what happens when poorly trained troops are thrown into the heart of a brutal conflict they aren't prepared for? Today, we dive into a shocking story of North Korean soldiers sent to the front lines of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What happens when a regime that's known for its iron-fisted control sends its soldiers to fight in an unfamiliar, merciless war? These are the unspoken faces of Russia's desperate war effort in Ukraine. North Korean soldiers. Few outside of intelligence circles knew they were even there, but now the truth is coming to light. In this video, we'll uncover their struggles, fears, and the terrifying reality of their deployment. North Korea, a nation isolated from much of the world, is notorious for its military might, or at least the image of it. Its soldiers are trained to obey orders without question, but in reality, many lack the advanced training and combat experience necessary to survive in a modern, high-intensity battlefield. So what happens when these soldiers are thrust into a war they're unprepared for? It all began when Russia, facing mounting casualties and desperate to bolster its forces, turned to one of its few remaining allies, North Korea. Reports surfaced in late 2023 that North Korean troops were sent to fight alongside Russian forces, particularly in areas like Kursk, a city near the front lines. Kursk, a key site for Russia's war strategy, became the landing point for these troops. But many of these soldiers had no idea what they were walking into. They were sent with limited training, no real understanding of the complexities of the war, and a lack of proper equipment. From the moment they arrived, it became clear these soldiers were out of their depth. Communication is key in any military operation, but for these North Korean soldiers, the language barrier was an immediate challenge. They were deployed alongside Russian troops who spoke a language they couldn't understand, without translators or interpreters to bridge the gap. Simple commands were often misunderstood, leading to confusion on the battlefield. And as the war raged on, the divide between them and their Russian counterparts only grew. Not only did they struggle with language, but their cultural differences made integration almost impossible. North Korean soldiers, trained to trust only their own commanders and comrades, found it difficult to bond with the Russian troops. In a war where unity and teamwork are life or death, this lack of cohesion was a critical disadvantage. Despite North Korea's reputation for strict military discipline, the reality of their training is far less impressive. Many of these soldiers have spent years drilling with outdated equipment, focusing on rote memorization and obedience rather than adaptive, real-world combat strategies. When they were thrown into the chaotic, high-tech, fast-moving conflict in Ukraine, their lack of readiness was glaring. Ukraine's military has spent years adapting to modern warfare, employing advanced tactics and technology. North Korean soldiers, however, found themselves under-equipped and under-trained. They weren't just up against Ukraine's battle-hardened soldiers, they were fighting against the technology and expertise of NATO-backed forces. The result, devastating losses. As the battle raged on, the cracks in North Korea's military system became impossible to ignore. Many of these soldiers were not prepared for the intensity of modern warfare. Their morale plummeted as they witnessed the brutality of the conflict and the unrelenting pressure from Russian commanders. Desperation set in. Without the proper support, supplies, or even the basic training needed to survive, the soldiers began to question their fate. Many were reportedly left to fend for themselves on the front lines, with little to no backup from their Russian counterparts. The outcome was inevitable. North Korean soldiers, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't understand, suffered heavy casualties. Some retreated from the front lines, others were simply lost in the chaos. And those who survived faced the harsh reality of returning to a regime that had little tolerance for failure. For many, the consequences of their deployment would not end on the battlefield. The story of North Korean soldiers in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is one of desperation, tragedy, and the terrifying consequences of being unprepared for modern warfare. As the war drags on, more nations are being pulled into this brutal conflict, but for North Korea's soldiers, their experience in Kursk has exposed the vulnerabilities that even the most secretive regimes can't hide. For these men, the fight was more than just survival. It was a brutal wake-up call to the realities of war, and a tragic reminder of the costs when soldiers are thrown into a conflict they're not ready for.